Let me tell you something that might sting a little. Just because he's pretending you don't exist doesn't mean he's not thinking about you constantly. People don't always show their obsession with loud declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes the deepest fixation hides behind silence. He's not ignoring you because you're forgettable. He's doing it because remembering you hits too hard. Acting like you don't exist is easier than dealing with what your presence still stirs in him. That cold front, that blank stare when your name comes up, that's not peace, that's protection. See, obsession isn't always messy and loud. It's often quiet. It looks like scrolling through your profile in the middle of the night and never hitting like. It sounds like conversations where your name almost slips out, but he stops himself. It feels like a tight chest every time something reminds him of you, and then pretending none of it matters. He's not forgetting you, he's managing you, containing you, trying to cage the thoughts so they don't take over, but they still do. You think obsession means texting every day, chasing after someone, making dramatic moves, but that's not always how it works. Sometimes obsession takes the form of total avoidance. Not because he's indifferent, but because he feels too much, and he doesn't know how to feel that without unraveling. So he convinces himself that if he just acts like you are never there, maybe the feelings will fade. But feelings don't work that way. They don't vanish because you pretend hard enough. They fester. They grow in the dark. Here's the thing, when someone genuinely doesn't care, they don't have to avoid you. They're just at peace. They're neutral. But when someone is haunted by what they lost, when they're replaying the way you laughed, the way you looked at them, the way you challenged them, then ignoring you becomes work. It becomes a performance. Every silent moment is effort. Every blank stare is practiced. That's not disinterest. That's obsession disguised as detachment. And here's where it messes with your head. Because when someone pretends you don't exist, your brain starts asking dangerous questions. Was I ever enough? Did I imagine it all? Did I misread everything? You start erasing yourself to make sense of his silence. But what if I told you that silence isn't a statement about your worth? It's a mirror of his fear. What if this whole act of pretending is really just his inability to face what he's still feeling? He's not free of you, he's flooded by you, and he's doing everything he can not to drown. If you don't understand what his silence really means, you risk internalizing it, and that's where the danger begins. Because when someone pretends you don't exist and you believe them, it doesn't just hurt, it rewires your sense of reality. You begin to rewrite history, you question your memories, you wonder if you were just a temporary distraction, a momentary interest. That kind of mental spiral isn't harmless. It's devastating because it doesn't just make you doubt him, it makes you doubt yourself. The stakes aren't about getting him back. They're about what happens to you when you misunderstand what his silence means, when you believe his coldness is clarity, when you assume that his distance is evidence of disinterest. You start erasing the parts of yourself that were open, vulnerable, and real. And the truth is, nothing about his silence proves he's over you. What it actually reveals is a man still caught in a war between pride and feeling, but you're the one carrying the consequences. See, if you tell yourself the story that he never cared, that you were just a chapter he skipped through, then every tender moment, every laugh, every deep conversation gets reclassified as a mistake. And when that happens, you don't just lose the connection. You lose trust in your own intuition. You stop believing you can read people. You start wondering if your emotional compass is broken. That's the real cost of misreading emotional avoidance as truth. But here's what people don't tell you. Obsession doesn't end when someone leaves. It often begins there. Because as long as he was with you, as long as he had access to you, he could tell himself he was in control. But when he walked away, when he decided to pretend you didn't matter, that's when the emotional pressure began to build. Avoidance isn't resolution, it's deferral. And what we defer emotionally always returns. You silly louder. He may look fine. He may act like you never existed. But if you mattered, and you did, then you've left fingerprints all over his internal world. You don't erase real presence by pretending. You don't unfelt someone who saw you, challenged you, understood you, and he knows it. Somewhere deep beneath the performance is a man still trying to outrun the echo of your name in a quiet room. He's not forgetting, he's suppressing, and suppression has a shelf life. What most people miss is that emotional obsession doesn't shout, it simmers. It shows up in the background noise of his day, in the way he avoids certain places, skips certain songs, or suddenly gets quiet when someone brings you up. He might roll his eyes, scoff, or wave it off like it's nothing. But the overreaction is the tell. Indifference doesn't flinch. Indifference doesn't need to prove anything. But obsession needs control. And when he can't control how much you still occupy his thoughts, he tries to control the narrative. That's why he acts like you don't exist. But don't confuse silence with peace. Silence can be chaotic. Obsession is chaos that pretends to be still. That's why he distracts himself with work, with dating, with noise. Because if he sat still long enough, if he let the quiet catch up with him, he'd have to face what he's buried. And buried feelings don't die. They don't disappear. They wait. They surface in flashes, in memories, in dreams, in the sudden ache he feels when something reminds him of you. That's not healing. That's haunting. Staying in those moments. Avoidance is his comfort zone. Obsession is the price he pays for staying in it. And here's where it gets real. If you were truly irrelevant, he wouldn't be working so hard to erase you. He wouldn't need to avoid your name, your face, your memory. He'd be indifferent. But he's not. He's agitated, unsettled. That cold shoulder isn't calm, it's tension. And tension always has a source. That source is you. Think about it. If he didn't care, he'd be fine seeing you happy. He'd be unbothered by your presence in mutual spaces. He wouldn't need to prove he's over you by performing it so loudly. The fact that he is performing it at all, that's the red flag. That's the evidence of obsession he doesn't want anyone to notice. He might date someone else to prove a point, not to you, but to himself. He might over-explain why he's so done, just to convince people around him. But the harder he tries to control the story, the more obvious it becomes that the story still affects him. People don't spend energy on things they're done with. They spend it on what still matters, even if they wish it didn't. And here's the twist most don't see. The obsession isn't always about you. It's about how he felt when he was with you. Maybe you made him feel seen. Maybe you pulled out a version of him he hadn't met before. One that felt exposed, vulnerable, open. That version scared him. Because for someone who's built walls their whole life, being seen can feel like danger. So now, he's not just avoiding you, he's avoiding himself. Let me know when you're ready for part 4. This is what he's really running from. Not just the memory of you, but the version of himself that showed up in your presence. The one that couldn't hide behind sarcasm or ego. The one that dropped the act, even for a moment, and let himself feel. That level of emotional exposure is terrifying for someone who's never learned how to hold it. Vulnerability isn't just uncomfortable to him, it's threatening. And instead of growing through it, he shut it down. That's why he backed away. Not because there was nothing there, but because there was too much. The deeper the connection, the more pressure he felt to face himself. And the truth, he wasn't ready. So now he wears this mask. Cold, composed, unaffected. But masks are fragile, and the more he avoids, the heavier it becomes. That's the cost of obsession denied. He carries it like a weight, but he refuses to call it what it is. People don't just forget real connection. They don't swipe it away like a bad memory. It stays, it lingers in the smallest moments. A scent, a phrase, a flash of laughter. That's the thing about emotional imprint. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't need permission. It simply exists. So no matter how silent he is, no matter how much he acts like you're erased, you're still in there, in his thoughts, in his triggers, in the space he avoids when he sits alone too long. And he knows it. He just doesn't want to face it, because facing it would mean admitting that what you had wasn't just a passing phase. It was real. It meant something. And that kind of admission, that breaks the illusion of control he's clinging to. Because the moment he admits he still thinks about you, he has to admit he lost something. And people who tie their identity to control would rather lie to themselves than face that kind of truth. That's why regret for someone like him doesn't always look like an apology. It doesn't sound like, I miss you or I messed up. It's quieter. It hides in hesitation, in avoidance, in the way he checks your page but never reaches out. It shows up in the way no one else quite measures up, no matter how hard he tries to replace the feeling. That's not moving on. That's movement without direction. And it never leads to peace, just more distraction. You can't fake detachment forever. Sooner or later, the truth catches up. In quiet nights, in flashbacks, in the slow realization that what he ran from wasn't pain. It was the one thing that could help him grow. You. The hardest part to accept is this. You may never see the regret. He might never reach out, never say he was wrong, never offer closure, but that doesn't mean the regret isn't there. It just means pride is louder. And for someone like him, someone who's convinced that showing emotion is weakness, pride becomes his shield. It's not that he didn't feel anything, it's that he never learned how to express what he felt without losing control. So instead, he suppresses, denies, and distances. But what he can't escape is reality. And reality has a way of whispering when things get quiet. When the distractions fade, when the nights grow still, that's when the silence turns inward. That's when the thoughts return. Not just about you, but about him, who he became around you, who he was becoming before he ran, because he remembers. Maybe not in full detail, but the impact, the emotional residue, that stays. See, obsession doesn't always look like desperation. Sometimes it looks like complete avoidance, because it's easier to hide from a mirror than to stand in front of it. And you were his mirror. You showed him pieces of himself he wasn't ready to meet. The sensitive parts, the honest parts, the broken parts. You held up a reflection of what he could be if he let himself grow. That's not something you just forget. So yes, he may seem like he's doing fine. He may post, laugh, flirt, date. He might even look like he's thriving. But what you're seeing is a version curated for the world, not the truth that lives inside him. The highlight reel is never the full picture. And just because he looks unaffected doesn't mean he is unaffected. He's just become good at acting, at pretending, at performing detachment so convincingly that even he starts to believe it until something cracks the surface. And it always does. It might be a dream, a memory, a song that hits different, a friend who mentions your name, a moment of stillness where his defenses drop just enough for the truth to break through. That's when obsession rises to the surface, not in fireworks, but in a quiet wave of what ifs and should haves. And the most haunting part? By the time it surfaces, it's often too late to do anything about it. And that's the irony of avoidance. It feels safe in the short term, but in the long term, it traps you in your own unresolved feelings. And for him, those feelings don't just go away. They follow him. They linger in every space you once occupied. They show up in new relationships he can't fully connect with. They haunt him in the moments no one else can see. And whether he admits it or not, he knows. He's still thinking about you. He's still obsessed. And now comes the part that's hardest to believe, the part that demands the most strength from you. His obsession, his silence, his emotional paralysis. None of it is your responsibility to fix, because obsession doesn't equal action. It doesn't equal growth, and it definitely doesn't mean he's coming back. Just because you live in his mind doesn't mean he's ready to face you or himself or the truth of what happened. This is where clarity meets power, because the question isn't whether he still thinks about you. He does. It's not whether he still feels something. He does. The real question is, can he face what those feelings require? Can he show up with honesty, with emotional maturity, with accountability? For many, the answer is no. And that's not your burden to carry. That's his work to do. You see, some people are obsessed not with you directly, but with the version of themselves they got to touch when they were with you. The raw, unfiltered version that felt love without armor. And instead of becoming that version, they ran from it, because becoming it requires work, growth, change. It requires breaking habits, facing wounds, and choosing vulnerability over comfort. He wasn't ready. Maybe he still isn't, but that doesn't make the connection any less real. And it doesn't make you any less valuable. The mistake people often make is trying to interpret someone's silence as a measure of their own worth. But the truth is, how he left isn't a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of his emotional readiness. If he had to disappear to feel in control, if he had to erase you to quiet his mind, that doesn't mean you were too much. It means you touched a part of him he didn't know how to handle. And instead of facing it, he chose the easy road, silence, pretending, obsessing from a distance. But don't let his silence become your confusion. Don't let his fear become your self-doubt. Because while he's stuck in a loop of avoidance, you have the power to choose clarity. You have the power to stop assigning meaning to someone's inability to speak truth. You're not defined by who left or how they handled you. You're defined by how you choose to rise in the aftermath. So yes, he's pretending you don't exist, but behind that act, behind all the noise and the choir, behind the pretending and the pride, he feels it. He remembers. He replays. And in those quiet moments when no one's watching, when the world is still and the masks are down, he knows. He didn't walk away from nothing. He walked away from something real. And you don't need to wait for him to say it, because deep down, you already know. You are never forgettable. You are unforgettable. And he's still carrying that, whether he admits it or not.